Welcome back to the Charter Podcast, brought to you by St. Xavier University. I am Ruthie Polinsky, along with Alex Shapiro, and we are very thrilled to be welcoming in the Star Tribune's Ben Goessling, who covers the Minnesota Vikings, and he is here to talk about two teams on very different ends of the NFC North spectrum at this juncture in time. And Ben, I guess we'll just start with this. I mean, the way that the Vikings looked last week felt like this is a team that's built to make it to the very end. And I think this week, as we've sort of been previewing this matchup, the second time these two teams meet, it looks like this is a Super Bowl team, this Vikings team. And I'm just curious to hear sort of what the narrative has been like for you all, especially after the way Sam Darnold looked and has continued to sort of trajectory upwards.
Yeah, it's been interesting because this certainly was not the trajectory we thought would take place this season. I mean, this is not a team that was expected to be near the top of this division. In fact, a lot of people probably had them at the bottom of it, behind the Bears, thinking that everybody was going to be fairly competitive in the NFC North. So it has taken a lot of turns this year, but it does look like a team that has a lot of the pieces of what it would need to make a deep run. I mean, certainly winning the division would help because it probably comes with the number one overall seed. That's difficult to do when the Lions only have one loss and have a lot of the tiebreakers. But the quarterback play the Vikings have gotten has certainly been at a championship level. They have managed to avoid a lot of disruption to their offensive line, even though they lose Christian Darrisaw, their left tackle. And the defense certainly has been one of the best in the NFL. I mean, it really has been done with a lot of pieces that came in on one-year deals or came in kind of as underwhelming or unheralded pieces that they've added to this group, and they have made it all work. And there's a lot of things that I think they have that will help them win in January. How well will they run the ball? How well will they stop the run? I think those are questions that have come up throughout the season, especially the last few weeks here with the run defense. But a lot of what you think they need to go on a run seems to be here, and everybody is kind of on board. Everybody likes playing for Kevin O'Connell, and I think all of it has kind of just come together for the Vikings at the right time.
So you mentioned Sam Darnold playing at a championship caliber level, and he has absolutely revitalized his career with the Vikings. So my question for you is, if there is a deep playoff run, they make it to an NFC title game, they make it to a Super Bowl, and Sam Darnold is playing great throughout that, what do the Vikings do with Sam Darnold? And then what do they do with JJ McCarthy?
Well, I mean, that's going to be, I think, the question we're all asking. It certainly is one that's, I think, gaining more traction, and it's going to be a question that we discussed through much of the offseason, because they very much had signed Sam Darnold with the understanding that this is a one-year thing, that you are the bridge starter and we can help you rehabilitate your career. It almost seemed like kind of an open agreement of that, where everybody understood what this was going to be and what it was not going to be. And now when Sam Darnold's playing like this, when he sets the franchise record or ties the franchise record for or I guess is in position to tie the franchise record for touchdown passes in a season, became the first quarterback in 20 years to throw 5 touchdown passes in a game. This is not a level anybody has seen from Sam Darnold in his career, and certainly not one that the Vikings have seen at quarterback in quite a long time. I mean, he is doing things that they did not get from Kirk Cousins. I mean, some of the throws he's making, some of the mobility, I think, is something they would not have had. That the throw he makes last week where he evades a couple of guys, peels back to his right and hits Jefferson for a touchdown, that play is not happening with Kirk Cousins. So he is playing at such a level that it's hard to let that walk out the door. Could they sign him or put the franchise tag on him and trade him? I think it's a possibility. I think it's also a possibility that they say, let's move on to JJ McCarthy, knowing that it does give you a few years of ability to use that cap space to build the rest of the roster. Because this is still a team that only has 38 players on the roster next year. They have a lot of free agents. They only have 3 draft picks next year. So you do need some of that money to fortify the rest of this roster. And they're paying Justin Jefferson $35 million a year. So how does all of that square up with a quarterback? But when you're playing like this, when you're still only 26 years old, you make it to a point where you say, you know what, let's figure the rest of this out later. I have tended to think that if all things are equal, it's JJ McCarthy's job next year. If Darnold continues to change that discussion, it's very possible that the Vikings do try to get something done with him. I think a lot of this is going to be determined by what happens in the playoffs. We can talk all we want about the regular season, but a playoff run and victories in the playoffs tend to be the things that change people's plans. And that may be what ultimately tells the story here.
It's fascinating because you look at JJ McCarthy and sort of what he's had to go through this year. I'm a Michigan grad, so big JJ McCarthy gal. But you look at sort of what he even if he wouldn't have been playing this season, Ben, he still missed out on sort of that rookie season because of the injury, whether he was playing the starting quarterback or not. So you almost wonder if there's some value to having him sit sort of in like a Jordan Love scenario where he sat for a couple years and watched sort of a veteran make this sort of incredible sort of resurgence under Kevin O'Connell. And I also wonder about Sam Darnold's interest in wanting to stay put because of the way that this coaching staff has put him in this position to believe in him and give him this opportunity and also cater to his strengths as well. So I think it's just going to be a fascinating project for them to kind of dissect and work through as well. And when you talk about maybe Sam Darnold potentially not being on the Vikings next season, I think another key factor who may not be on the Vikings next season is defensive coordinator Brian Flores, who I know his name is really picking up steam in all head coaching openings, but particularly in Chicago as well. We talked about him at length when we previewed this matchup the first time. And Caleb Williams did a really nice job against that defense a couple weeks ago. It'll be interesting to see how it looks because this team has looked very different based on how they looked in San Francisco. But I'm curious to get your thoughts on sort of what's the discussion this week about attacking Caleb Williams a second time, the Brian Flores scenario, and just sort of everything that comes with that.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the defense has been a driving force in why they're doing what they're doing. And you saw a lot of that in that first game. I think the thing that Caleb Williams did to counteract it is he just made a lot of plays off schedule in that game that are hard to counteract. I mean, it's just difficult to defend some of the things he did in that game where he gets away from Blake Cashman and then flips the one to DeAndre Swift on the move. I mean, that's not a throw that was Patrick Mahomes kind of stuff. That's not stuff you see from many NFL quarterbacks. And there were 2 or 3 of those in that game where you're just like, there's not really an answer for that other than to be on that same level of athleticism as that guy, which just not very many people are going to be able to do. They had a number of plays in that game, whether it was Andrew Van Ginkel or Blake Cashman a couple of times. They had Caleb Williams in their crosshairs and had chances for sacks. He got away, and certainly the 49ers did it. We saw the Texans do it earlier this year. Caleb Williams has taken sacks, but he also has done a good job and did a good job against the Vikings that first time of escaping some of those things, extending plays. I think he had a scramble on a 4th down that was pretty important in that game. A lot of his mobility, a lot of his ability to make plays with his feet and throw on the run, I think are some of what helped him do what he did in that first game. So a lot of the discussion is about trying to hem him in and not let him make those plays off schedule. And you hear this every time anybody faces a mobile quarterback, but I think with him, the difference is that it's not just running to make plays with his feet. It's some of the things, even as a rookie, that he already does, throwing on the run, that just make things difficult. And a lot of it is rushing him in a way that doesn't allow him to do that, where he doesn't have answers outside the pocket. I think that's certainly going to be a focus this week. They've played quarterbacks like C.J. Stroud this year where they have to have that kind of a contained rush plan, and I think that's going to be some of what we see them try to do to Caleb Williams on Monday night as well.
All right, Ruthie shouted out her Michigan grad, JJ McCarthy. So after you gassing up Caleb Williams, I got to shout out my USC Trojan, Caleb Williams and Sam Darnold.
Yep.
And by the way,
There you go.
I don't think we can overlook the Trojan to Trojan connection. Sam Darnold to Jordan Addison. Yep. You pair USC quarterbacks and wide receivers, good things are going to happen. I want to talk about a UTEP running back, though. A UTEP running back, Aaron Jones. This is a guy who is on track to have a career high in carries for the Vikings. And his durability was kind of one of the questions in Green Bay. But one of my questions was, is he being underutilized in Green Bay? Because he's an extremely dynamic guy. Now, you had questions about the run game moving forward. I'm just curious, do you think he's being utilized better in Minnesota than maybe he was in Green Bay? Is he holding up? Like, where do your concerns come from as it, revolves around Aaron Jones?
Well, it's been interesting because you're right. I do agree that the Packers a lot of times were loath to use him as much as it seemed that like they should. I mean, you saw a lot of that with Matt LaFleur. It was always, I think, fair to wonder how many times they were calling runs and then those things get changed between Matt LaFleur and when the ball is snapped, particularly with Aaron Rodgers at the helm. How many times did Aaron Rodgers check out on a run? I think we're never going to have the answer to that, but you always wonder that in terms of how much Aaron Jones got the ball. But we've seen it this year with the Packers where when it's Josh Jacobs, and maybe some of it is just how they're constructed, but they have been more willing to lean on that type of a back than they ever seemed to be with Aaron Jones in terms of how much they would trust him in the run game. He always was a big threat in the passing game. He was, a safe receiver for Aaron Rodgers, for Jordan Love. But I thought at the end of last season when he came back from that injury and had that run to help the Packers get in the playoffs and beat the Cowboys, they were a different team when they flowed through him. So the Vikings, I think, have realized some of that where they use him as much as he's been used anywhere in his career. And a lot of the questions with him, I think part of the reason he was available were those questions about his durability. And he talked earlier in the season about kind of a prehab routine that he does before practice now that he feels like has helped him get through the practice week and absorb the workload in practice so that even when he gets to game day, he's not quite as beat up and not quite as susceptible to some of the long-term soft tissue injuries that he's dealt with through a lot of his career. I have thought for a while that they were playing with fire in terms of how much they use him, just given that history, but they have done a really good job managing him and keeping him healthy. Even when he had that hamstring injury earlier in the season, you're kind of thinking, okay, this is going to be something that crops up and keeps him limited or possibly keeps him out for a number of weeks. But he really didn't miss much time with that and used a lot of the treatment modalities they have in this building to get back pretty quickly. So all things considered, I think they've done a nice job keeping him healthy. They are going to need him in the playoffs, though. So the workload is something that if there are Cam Akers snaps or Ty Chandler snaps to take some of that workload off Aaron Jones, I think they are mindful of that and try to do that as much as they can because they will need him. They hope for a while yet. It's not just these last 4 games. They're hoping they're playing for quite a bit longer than that.
I want to go back really quick to Jordan Addison because I think Justin Jefferson, the Bears did a nice job kind of holding him at bay, I think, in that first matchup. But then you're obviously opening things up for another really talented receiver. And I think it's an interesting way of looking at things when you see that that Justin Jefferson actually makes Jordan Addison better because he's getting so much attention. It opens things up for Jordan Addison. It feels like he's really capitalized on that opportunity. What can you tell us sort of about the dynamic between the two of them and how it's affecting this offense?
Yeah, I think you're right. I think it has made a big difference that Justin Jefferson tilts as much of the coverage as he does to his side of the field. We saw it in that first Bears game. There was a lot of coverage that was safety over the top of Justin Jefferson, or maybe it's a safety in the middle of the field, but he's kind of not really playing the middle of the field because Jefferson's on one side. It does open things up for Jordan Addison and for TJ Hawkinson, and both those guys had big days in that first game. They both go over 100 yards, including TJ Hawkinson doing a lot of that work in the fourth quarter and overtime to get over that 100-yard mark. I think actually after having a pretty quiet start to that game, I think a lot of what Addison has done well is he handles press coverage better than you'd expect for a guy his size. He's not a big receiver and was a guy that I think everybody thought if you get physical with him in the NFL, that could slow him down. But he's done a nice job of beating press coverage with releases, with footwork, and even I think showing he can hold up to a little bit of that contact and have the balance and the core strength, I think, to get through it and not let him kind of take him off of his spot, take him off of his route path. And he's shown body control, being able to adjust to balls in flight. Saw it last week against the Falcons where he has the underthrown ball and then comes back for the touchdown and kind of scampers into the end zone after that. So a lot of the traits I think that have helped him out are just whether it's body control or his ability to fight through contact. Those things are probably better. They're bigger strengths to his game than maybe people thought there would be. And there's no doubt that when people are so focused on Justin Jefferson that they say we're going to deal with the rest of it, even though it's Jordan Addison and TJ Hawkinson, an offense that has a lot of weapons. When Justin Jefferson is everybody's focus, it does help those guys have more favorable matchups. They're very rarely facing the focus of the coverage or even the best corner going through it. So I think all of that stuff has helped over the course of the season for Jordan Addison and probably the rest of the offense as a whole.
All right, but I got one more question for you. It's not a football question, though. It is a Kevin Warren question.
Okay.
Kevin Warren is in line to make an extremely important head coaching hiring decision, and it sounds like he will be very influential in that decision, not just GM Ryan Poles. So my question is, over his time in Minnesota, he's really best known for building US Bank Stadium. Yeah. And obviously he was really important with the Wilf family in purchasing the Vikings.
Yep.
But over his time in Minnesota, were there moments where it was clear he was involved in football decisions? And if so, were there any key influential football decisions that he made that you know about? And I know it's tough to say, like, this guy made that decision, another guy made another, but it seems like he is very influential here in football decisions.
Yeah, that is interesting because I do think that's a little bit of a shift from what we saw in Minnesota, because most of his time here was Rick Spielman as the GM. Obviously, Rick was here for 15 years, whether it was the head of the personnel department or becoming the GM in 2012. So there was a little more of an established presence in the front office than, or at least a guy that had been in that seat long enough to accumulate some influence, accumulate some pedigree or equity in the building, I think. Maybe a little more than Ryan Poles has. Obviously, Ryan Poles is in his third year there and had a lot of success in Kansas City. But I do think it's a little bit of a different dynamic than it was in Minnesota. And I know there was some of that back and forth of how involved is one going to be in football? How involved is Rick Spielman going to be in business? There was a little bit of tension there to the point where I don't think it ever got terribly easy for Kevin Warren to be involved in football, perhaps to the degree that he would have wanted to be. I don't think that was something that happened a whole lot here. So I guess it's not a huge surprise to hear that he wants to be involved in some of those things, and obviously has an even more frontal role probably in Chicago than he did in Minnesota. So all of that makes sense. But I do think that is a shift. And I think how he handles that and the move they make is going to be a reflection of how all of this works going forward. Because, I mean, you guys know this is a critical moment for that franchise. You have to find the person that can partner with Caleb Williams and make this thing go somewhere, because it looks like the Bears have a quarterback that can play at an awfully high level for a long time. And, things can change. It's year one, but all of the traits seem to be there. They have to find somebody that can bring all of that to bear, pardon the pun. And I think this decision is going to have a lot to say about whether that happens. I think it's a really important moment for the Bears. And if he's going to be part of that process, it's going to reflect pretty heavily on his tenure in that spot in Chicago. So, yeah, no doubt it's going to be very interesting to see how that goes. I do think that's a little bit of a change from just how things worked in Minnesota. So, certainly a pivotal moment for him and for the Bears as a whole.
It's great stuff, Ben. Let's get your game pick for this one real quick.
Yeah, I've got the Vikings winning this one. I think the Bears, after 4 yards in the first half last week, you wonder the way they've lost games, how much they're going to be able to come back and kind of keep at it and keep things tight and competitive here, especially when the playoffs have kind of faded from view. It's a Monday night game. It's a division game. Those things are always a little closer than you would maybe expect otherwise. But I've got the Vikings winning 31-20. 31-20, I think, is what I picked in the paper, and I'll stick with that here. I think it's one where they add a score late to pull away. It's probably tight for a while. I think Caleb Williams keeps the Bears in this thing, but I think ultimately the Vikings, when that crowd will be fired up Monday night, I think they pull away and win by a couple scores at home.
Love it, Ben. Thank you so much for taking some time to chat about those Vikings with
Yeah.
us. Enjoy this run because, man, it's tough on the other side of covering the other team. So it's awesome.
I've been there. I feel for you.
Yeah,
It becomes a little harder to cover.
This Vikings team, for some reason, I think they're just easy to root for. So it's got to be a blast covering them right now, especially when
a lot of compelling stories for sure.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks so much, Ben Goessling of the Star Tribune. We so appreciate your time.
Yeah, so much. Thanks so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Our thanks again to Ben Goessling of the Star Tribune, Vikings beat writer. I mean, just great stuff. Is it clear, Alex, that I'm like a Vikings fan now? Like, what's going on? I don't know what it is about that team. I think Kevin O'Connell is so likable. The Sam Darnold story is so likable. That defense is so fun to watch. They've got exciting players. It feels like a team that's like just vibing at the right time. And I don't know. It's really fun to watch for some reason. And I think it's because they're not always good. Like it's fun to see a team kind of take a rise.
Absolutely. And like set the divisional rivalries aside for Chicago Bears fans who are listening and probably saying, what do you mean this is a great team to root for? But, kind of like from the long view and from the rest of the league, this is a team that you root for that is extremely fun to watch. It reminds me of the Lions of a few years ago, this franchise that, they've been good. They've won division titles, but they've never won in the playoffs. And now this year, it seems like they're tearing it down. Everybody predicts them to be last in the division. And now here they are, with an opportunity to win the division,
right?
With an opportunity to make a late postseason push. Like those are the Cinderella stories that we love in sports. And it's not just the team as a whole, it's also the players like Sam Darnold getting the second shot. They're a super fun team to watch.
I think also because the Lions have been this sort of like juggernaut all season, to have a team in the division sort of threaten them, I think is kind of exciting. If you're a Bears fan and you're looking for something, be like, yeah, you can't all make it, like, I don't know if there's a way to kind of get yourself excited about watching those two teams go at it. And listen, Green Bay's not far behind. I mean, I think when you watch them play, it feels different when you watch the Lions play versus the other teams. But this past weekend, the Vikings looked like they could hang with anybody. So it's cool to see for sure. Okay, Alex Shapiro, I know the game isn't until Monday, so we still have some time, but I'm curious if you have your game pick ready to rock here.
Yeah, I don't think I have to wait. I think I could have made my game pick minutes after the 49ers game. It is the Vikings by 2 scores. I'm just going to ride with Goessling. What do you say, 31-20?
Yeah, that's a pretty good
riding
score.
With Ben. It feels good, so I'm going 31-20.
Yeah, I'm kind of with you there. I think the Bears are going to be lucky to score 20 points after what we saw last week. And this is arguably a better defense than San Francisco, just with the defense that we saw San Francisco throw out there on Sunday. I think Thomas Brown is overwhelmed, and deservedly so, right? Like, I mean, you've literally gone from calling plays to being an interim head coach. You have a lot going on to be able to put a good product on the field in this short amount of time. So I don't feel great about the offense getting going. I don't feel great about the defense stopping anyone. And I'm going to go even bigger than you and Ben. I'm going to say it's going to be a 35-17 loss.
Yikes.
35-17 Bears loss. I think if the Bears get down early again, I mean, good luck. It's just going to be tough. Yeah. And this Vikings team, man, they are playing for something. And we've talked about this, but the Lions playing the Bills, if that game in my brain can really go any which way, but that we'll see what happens. But if the Lions lose to the Bills and the Vikings know that they have a chance to make way in the division, that's going to get ugly. I mean, this is a team that's playing for something. And we talked about it with Ben. I mean, they look like a Super Bowl contender right now. So 35-17, Alex Shapiro. How do you feel about that?
You said something, and Ben also kind of hinted at this, that does ring true, where it's like, how many comebacks in the second half? How much fight does this team really have in it? For the first time last week, I saw things on tape that I don't think we really had seen very much of, and that was guys making business decisions.
Mm-hmm.
So this will be another test for Thomas Brown. This Chicago Bears team is on high quit watch. They got nothing to play for except for pride, and for some guys, future contracts and jobs on other teams, which is obviously a great motivator, but that is not the case for everybody. So is he going to be able to get these guys to not quit, to keep their minds on football and not on Cancun, because that's where they're all headed in a month?
1, 2, 3, Cancun. You took the words out of my mouth, and I think the shift in the practice schedule this week, that's something I didn't get a chance to ask Ben about, but with the Vikings on Wednesday, an extra day of practice on a Monday night game, they had a full padded physical practice on Wednesday. The Bears had Wednesday off and they had a walkthrough on Thursday. A team that's lost 7 straight games. The Vikings are playing for something. And the Bears, who claim to be this physical, violent team, are just kind of, to me, we're mailing it in. So I'm curious to see how they look. Prove me wrong. Please prove me wrong. I don't want to be right about this, but it's hard for me to really justify anything but a Vikings blowout.
I'm with it. We are aligned once again.
Once again, Alex Shapiro, great stuff. Enjoy your stress-free Sunday, right? Kind of a nice, relaxing, just watch the rest of the league. And just a fun Sunday as we get ready for hopefully not as ugly of a Monday night.
I will actually be covering Blackhawks Islanders in some capacity. I'll be cutting Blackhawks Islanders highlights. So we get to see if the Blackhawks can get some revenge, keep that third period momentum going against the Islanders, playing them in quick succession. So I'm going to have to tape some NFL football games.
Wow.
I'm going to have to DVR those bad boys, because I'm going to be dialed into Frank Nazar and the Chicago Blackhawks.
Let's go, Frankie N. We love it. Alex Shapiro, thank you. Thank you for listening. This is the Charter Podcast brought to you by St. Xavier University. We'll see you Monday night, possibly post-game recap. Alex Shapiro, love it.
Yeah.
All right, have a great weekend, everyone.